I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The first time I saw her again was at the cafe near the old bridge, the one with mismatched chairs and a clock that was always a few minutes slow. I had been sitting there most afternoons lately, pretending to work, but really just watching people who looked like they belonged somewhere. Then she walked in, Mrs. Malik. Or Sarah, as she insisted later. She looked different, but not in the way people do when they're older. More like she'd learned how to carry her silence better. Her hair was shorter now, a loose wave falling just above her shoulders. She wore a faded denim jacket that didn't match the sharp, graceful woman I used to know. The one who used to tell me to take my shoes off before stepping into her kitchen when I was 17. She noticed me before I could decide if I should say hi. "Armin," she said, her voice half a question, half certainty. I laughed quietly, looking up from my laptop. "Didn't think you'd remember." She smiled in that calm, half-hidden way, like she was keeping a memory behind her teeth. "You were the one who broke my son's guitar string, remember? Hard to forget the noise." Her eyes flicked down to my coffee, then to the empty chair across from me. A pause, the kind that stretches and tests whether it's still allowed to exist. "Mind if I sit?" And just like that, the air changed, not dramatically, just a shift, like a room remembering it once held laughter. She ordered tea. No sugar. She always took it that way. The steam rose between us, thin and trembling. We talked about safe things, the town, her art classes, how my mother still sent her WhatsApp forwards about miracle remedies. She rolled her eyes at that, the same way she used to years ago. Every now and then, she'd glance toward the window, tapping her spoon against the cup. A soft, rhythmic sound that kept time with the silence. "So," she asked finally, "what brings you back?" "Just time," I said. "Too much of it." She nodded, like she knew the kind of loneliness that didn't need explaining. There was something about the way she watched people. Not searching, not judging, just seeing. It made me aware of my own movements. How I kept folding the napkin into tighter and tighter squares. How I couldn't decide where to rest my hands. At one point, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, smiled faintly, then turned it face down. I pretended not to notice, but she caught me. "Still the same," she said, a teasing note under her breath. "You used to stare at things you wanted to ask about, but never did." I swallowed a reply that sounded too much like truth. Maybe I just learned when not to. That made her laugh, low and quiet, the kind of sound that fills a small space more than it should. When she left, it wasn't abrupt. She just stood, smoothed her jacket, and said, "Don't make a habit of hiding in corners, Armin." Her hand brushed the table as she passed, fingertips near the napkin I'd folded to pieces. And then she was gone. I thought that was it. A brief, strange afternoon with someone who used to know my family. But that night, just before I turned off my phone, a message appeared. "You forgot your sketchbook." Except, I hadn't brought one. I stared at the screen, heart quiet but heavy, realizing she still knew more than she was saying. She invited me to her studio the next day, said she found something that might still belong to me. I knew she meant the sketchbook, the one that didn't exist. Her place was exactly how I remembered it. The smell of turpentine and cardamom tea, light filtering through half-drawn curtains, paintings leaning against the walls like quiet witnesses. "You still paint?" I asked, trying not to stare too long at her hands as she tied her hair back. "Sometimes," she said, "when it doesn't feel like work." She handed me a small notebook, old, corners frayed, faint pencil smudges across the cover. It was mine, actually, from years ago. Drawings of guitars, faces, random lines. She'd kept it. "I thought you'd want it back," she said. I nodded, but couldn't meet her eyes. There was too much inside that gesture. Too many unspoken years folded into it. She made tea while I looked around. Her son's photo was still on the shelf, taken before he moved abroad. My best friend once, though we hadn't spoken in over a year. When she placed the cup in front of me, our fingers brushed. Lightly, almost accidental. But it stayed with me longer than it should have. "You still keep this place beautiful," I said. She smiled faintly. "That's all I can keep beautiful these days." Something in her tone made me look up. For a moment, the distance in years between us blurred, replaced by something else. Understanding, maybe. or loneliness, recognizing itself. I used to think you'd leave this town and never come back, she said after a while. I tried, I admitted. But sometimes you realize you didn't leave anything behind. You just got older. She looked at me like she wanted to argue, but didn't. Just turned her gaze to the window, where the rain had started to fall in slow, steady lines. Her silence had weight, not heavy, but deliberate. You're too young to sound tired, she murmured finally. You're too kind to pretend you don't. The air shifted again, like something delicate had cracked, softly, under the surface. We sat there for a long time. No music, just the sound of rain and her spoon stirring tea long after the sugar had dissolved. I thought of asking how she'd been since the divorce. Everyone in town knew, but the question caught in my throat. Instead, I said, I used to think you saw everything. Even back then. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way she might study a painting. Maybe I just remember the things people try to forget. That line stayed with me, longer than anything else that day. When I left, she walked me to the door. I said goodbye, but she only nodded, her hand resting lightly on my arm for a second too long. It wasn't a touch that asked for anything. It just said, I remember you too. And somehow, that made it harder to breathe. I started going by the studio more often. Sometimes to drop off groceries she said she didn't need. Sometimes just to check on the plants. We both pretended it was casual. It wasn't. She never said I shouldn't come. But every time I did, there was that pause, the one between her opening the door and deciding what to do with me. One afternoon, the light was strange, too gold, almost soft enough to make anything feel forgiven. She was painting. I stood behind her, watching the brush move slow and certain across the canvas. You always stand too close, she said without turning. Maybe I like the view. Her hand stilled, just for a second. Then she laughed, quietly, the way people do when they're pretending not to. I'm too old for that kind of talk, Armin. Maybe I'm too young to mean it, I said. Neither of us moved after that. The air felt thin, the kind you breathe carefully so it doesn't break. The next day, I didn't go. Or the day after. Didn't even text. It was easier to miss her than to risk what came next. But on the third morning, I found myself walking past her street anyway. Her car wasn't there. A dull ache I didn't expect settled in my chest. I went home, told myself to stop imagining things. That evening, my phone buzzed. Could you help me fix the shelf tomorrow? It's coming loose. No emoji. No greeting. Just that. I stared at it too long before typing sure. When I showed up, she was in the kitchen, hair tied messily, sleeves rolled up. You don't have to, she began. I know, I said, already reaching for the toolbox. The shelf was fine, barely crooked, but I kept at it anyway, hammering slower than necessary. She stood beside me, handing over nails one by one. Our fingers brushed every time. At one point, she said quietly, my son called yesterday. I froze. How's he doing? Good. He asked if I'd seen you around. I turned, met her eyes. And what did you say? That I hadn't. The sound of that landed like something heavy on tile. She saw the way I swallowed it, how my shoulders stiffened. For a second, she looked sorry. Then she stepped back. People talk, she said softly. Small town. You know how it is. Yeah, I murmured. I know. I packed up the tools, every movement too sharp. She poured tea. Neither of us drank. When I finally turned to leave, she stopped me, just a touch on my sleeve. Armin, she said, barely above a whisper. You shouldn't come so often. I nodded. Do you want me to stop? She didn't answer, just looked at me, eyes wet but steady. For a heartbeat, the space between us vanished. Her breath near mine. My hand almost reached for hers. But then the front door clicked open. A neighbor's voice floated in, calling her name. We stepped apart. She smiled like nothing had happened. I smiled back like I believed her. We hadn't seen each other for a week. She'd stopped replying to my messages, and I'd stopped pretending not to care. Every evening I'd walk past her street, like someone tracing the outline of a bruise, not enough to hurt, just enough to remember where it was. One evening, I saw her sitting on the park bench near the studio. Alone. A paper cup of tea beside her, gone cold. She looked up before I said anything. You're getting predictable, she said softly. Or you're just easy to find. I replied, sitting beside her. The air was heavy with that pre-evening quiet. Kids shouting in the distance, the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. I thought you weren't speaking to me, I said after a while. I wasn't, she said. And yet here we are. She said it lightly, but her eyes told the truth. Tired, uncertain, too aware of what wasn't being said. I wanted to ask what she was afraid of. Instead, I said, you don't have to keep pushing me away. She looked at her hands, turning the paper cup slowly. You don't understand what this looks like. Then tell me, I said. Tell me what it is. Her lips parted, a small inhale, then silence. It's wrong, she whispered finally. You're his friend, Armin. She stopped, shaking her head, a faint, helpless smile tugging at her mouth. You're too young to be sitting here trying to fix a woman who should know better. Something in me twisted, sharp, protective, foolish. You think I'm trying to fix you? She didn't answer, just breathed out slow. You make it hard not to want to be seen. The words landed like something fragile, not meant to escape, but too late to take back. We sat in silence for a long time. The light dimmed, the sky bruised purple and gray. She told me about her mornings, how she wakes before dawn, listens to old songs, leaves her phone face down on purpose. I told her about how nothing feels right since I came back, how everyone seems like they're waiting for me to become someone I don't recognize anymore. At one point, she laughed, soft, almost embarrassed. I shouldn't be saying these things. I'm not asking you to, I said. You just do. Her eyes lifted to mine, and something in them broke open, years of self-control thinning at the edges. You remind me of when I still believed people could change, she said quietly. I didn't know what to do with that. So I just looked at her, really looked, and said, and you make me think maybe they still can. Her breath caught, the faintest tremor. We were close enough that if one of us leaned in, even slightly, everything would shift. But she turned her face away first. Don't, she whispered. Not yet. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled when she reached for the tea. And as I stood to leave, she asked, without looking at me, would you still come tomorrow if I said you shouldn't? She stopped coming to the park. At first, I told myself she was busy, classes, errands, life. But the week stretched, and silence settled like dust on everything she'd once touched. I walked past her house twice, maybe 3 times. Curtains drawn, porch light off. A new car parked out front, silver, unfamiliar. Something shifted in the air. On the 4th day, I finally saw her again, at the grocery store. She was standing by the fruit aisle, laughing at something a man beside her said. He was older, polite, the kind of man who probably used words like sensible. I didn't say anything, just turned into the next aisle and stared at rows of cereal boxes until my pulse stopped tripping over itself. When I finally looked back, she was gone. The next morning, I went to the studio. Door locked, curtains closed, a note taped to the glass in her handwriting. Closed for a few weeks. Be well. That's all. No name. No explanation. I sat on the front steps for a long time, hands in my pockets, trying to feel angry but only managing confused. She'd been the one who asked me not to stop coming. And now she'd vanished without a sound. Days blurred into each other. Half-hearted drawings, coffee gone cold, texts I typed and deleted before the first word finished forming. Are you okay? I shouldn't have said that. I missed delete. 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 I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe she'd needed space. But the truth pressed deeper. Maybe I had scared her. Maybe that look, that almost moment on the bench, had tipped something she'd spent years holding steady. Then one evening, my phone buzzed. It was her son. Hey man, you've been around my mom's place lately. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, heart pacing between panic and guilt. Not really, I typed back, then deleted it. I didn't reply. That night, I walked down her street again. The air smelled like rain and burnt leaves. Her windows were lit, faint and warm. A shadow passed, hers, maybe, across the curtains. I wanted to knock, to ask, to explain. But something in me stopped, pride, fear, or maybe respect. Instead, I just stood there, feeling the distance expand, slow and deliberate. Through the window, I caught a glimpse, a man's coat on the rack. The same one from the store. That should have been enough to make me leave. But I waited anyway. For what? I couldn't tell. A sign? A mistake? Something human. Nothing came. It rained the night I saw her again. Not a storm, just the kind of steady, tired rain that makes everything sound like memory. I was walking home from the cafe, collar turned up, when I saw the light still on in her studio. The closed sign was gone. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was knocking. The door opened halfway. She looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to let me in or apologize. "You're soaked," she said. I didn't know where else to go, I admitted. Something in that must have reached her, because she stepped aside. Inside, nothing had changed. Same faint smell of paint and rain. Same half-finished canvas by the window. Only now, a new mug sat on the table beside another one. His, probably. The polite man from the store. She caught me looking. "He's someone I knew from before," she said quietly. "Nothing serious." I nodded, but the ache was already there. Not sharp, just steady, like something you stop fighting because it's part of you now. We stood in the middle of the room, silence spreading between us like wet paint. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said after a while. I needed to remind myself what my life was before all this." "All this?" I asked, voice low. She exhaled, her breath trembling a little. "You. The visits. The warmth. It made me forget how much distance I've built to stay safe." I stepped closer, slowly. "Do you want me to stay away?" Her eyes flicked up, met mine. There it was again, that flicker of honesty she couldn't hide. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. "I only know what I shouldn't." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The rain pressed soft fingers against the windows. "Finally," I said, "you told me once I make it hard not to want to be seen. Maybe you should stop pretending that's a bad thing." Her eyes filled. Not tears. Not yet. Just the shine of someone caught between guilt and relief. "I'm too old for this kind of mistake," she said. "Then let it be mine." That made her laugh, small, tired, but real. "I can't promise anything," she said. "I'm not asking for anything," I replied. I just didn't want to leave it unsaid. A year passed before anyone noticed they'd started having tea together again. Not every day, not like before. Just, sometimes, late mornings, when the light slipped through the blinds at the cafe near the old bridge. She still took hers without sugar. He still ordered black coffee he never finished. No one asked questions anymore. Maybe because there was nothing to hide. Maybe because they'd both learned that some things aren't meant to be explained. After that night in the studio, things changed quietly. She stopped locking the door during the day. He stopped walking past her house pretending he didn't mean to. They didn't fall into each other. They circled, slowly, like people trying to memorize the same language again. Sometimes, he helped with errands or fixed things she didn't really need fixed. Sometimes, she painted while he sat nearby, reading or sketching something half-formed. There were still pauses, heavy, familiar ones, but they no longer hurt. They just belonged. One afternoon, he found her at the park bench. Same one. The rain had just stopped, leaving the air clean and thin. "You're early," she said. 8:47, he replied, checking his watch. "You said that's your favorite minute of the morning." She smiled. That same small, unreadable curve that used to undo him. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said, and meant it. They sat without speaking, watching a few children chase puddles. She leaned back, eyes half closed, face turned toward the wind. "Do you ever think we made it too complicated?" he asked quietly. She thought for a while before answering. "No, I think we just made it real." In town, people still called her Mrs. Malik. Some whispered when they saw him walking beside her, but neither of them cared anymore. The whispers faded like everything else eventually does. Her son came home once that summer. They all had lunch together, polite, steady, unremarkable. But when he left, she reached across the table and brushed her fingers against Armin's hand. A quiet thank you. Nothing more. Nothing less. Months later, the cafe changed owners. New chairs, same slow clock on the wall. They still met there sometimes. Always at the same table near the window. Always the same order. There was no declaration, no confession, just the slow, steady rhythm of two lives that had found a way to coexist without apology. He would watch her draw tiny circles on her cup with her fingertip. She would glance at him like she was making sure he was still real. They didn't need to say I love you. They'd already lived it. In all the quiet, imperfect ways love survives. When they left, he'd fold the napkin once, just once now, and tuck it under his cup. She'd glance at it, smiling faintly. Still folding things too small, she'd say. And you? He'd answer, still noticing. As they stepped out into the soft evening light, she slipped her hand into his. Brief, certain. No hiding this time. No guilt. Just two people walking home, finally in the same direction. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next? The clock on the wall ticked louder than before. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth off her skin. Her hand came up halfway, then hesitated. I thought she'd pull back, but she didn't. Her fingers rested lightly on my cheek, brief, unsteady, as if the touch itself was both apology and permission. You should go, she said. I nodded. Yeah. Neither of us moved. Then, quietly, she said, thank you for not pretending this didn't matter. I smiled, small, tired, honest. Okay. And when I left, the rain had stopped. I went home and finally let myself write the message I'd been holding back. You were right. I don't understand what this looks like, but I think I understand what it feels like. My thumb hovered over send. Then I turned the phone face down on the table. Didn't feel heartbroken. Felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. A year passed before anyone noticed they'd started having tea together again. Not every day. Not like before. Just, sometimes, late mornings, when the light slipped through the blinds at the cafe near the old bridge. She still took hers without sugar. He still ordered black coffee he never finished. No one asked questions anymore. Maybe because there was nothing to hide. Maybe because they'd both learned that some things aren't meant to be explained. After that night in the studio, things changed quietly. She stopped locking the door during the day. He stopped walking past her house pretending he didn't mean to. They didn't fall into each other. They circled, slowly, like people trying to memorize the same language again. Sometimes, he helped with errands or fixed things she didn't really need fixed. Sometimes, she painted while he sat nearby, reading or sketching something half-formed. There were still pauses, heavy, familiar ones, but they no longer hurt. They just belonged. One afternoon, he found her at the park bench. Same one. The rain had just stopped, leaving the air clean and thin. You're early, she said. 8:47. He replied, checking his watch. You said that's your favorite minute of the morning. She smiled. That same small, unreadable curve that used to undo him. You remember that? I remember everything, he said, and meant it. They sat without speaking, watching a few children chase puddles. She leaned back, eyes half closed, face turned toward the wind. Do you ever think we made it too complicated? He asked quietly. She thought for a while before answering. No, I think we just made it real. In town, people still called her Mrs. Malik. Some whispered when they saw him walking beside her, but neither of them cared anymore. The whispers faded like everything else eventually does. Her son came home once that summer. They all had lunch together, polite, steady, unremarkable. But when he left, she reached across the table and brushed her fingers against Armin's hand. A quiet thank you. Nothing more. Nothing less. Months later, the cafe changed owners. New chairs, same slow clock on the wall. They still met there sometimes. Always at the same table near the window. Always the same order. There was no declaration, no confession, just the slow, steady rhythm of two lives that had found a way to coexist without apology. He would watch her draw tiny circles on her cup with her fingertip. She would glance at him like she was making sure he was still real. They didn't need to say I love you. They'd already lived it. In all the quiet, imperfect ways love survives. When they left, he'd fold the napkin once, just once now, and tuck it under his cup. She'd glance at it, smiling faintly. Still folding things too small, she'd say. And you? He'd answer, still noticing. As they stepped out into the soft evening light, she slipped her hand into his. Brief, certain. No hiding this time. No guilt. Just two people walking home, finally in the same direction. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, Real love stories do you want to hear next?